in now.
Okay, thanks. So welcome everyone to the Poverty Reduction Policy Development Committee meeting. We are going to have a discussion today, firstly about benefit take-up and then about garden sharing. Joyce has just joined us from London Tend. Hi Joyce. Angie from Hooga, who's also joining for that discussion, is going to come back at 4 o'clock. It's up to you if you'd like to come back at 4 o'clock or sit with us through the first bits of the meeting that don't really apply to you.
I'll come back.
Okay, yeah, okay.
4 o'clock.
Yeah, I think the next bit will probably take about half an hour, so yeah, 4 o'clock would be good. Okay, thanks.
Do I hang up and go?
Yeah, just leave the meeting and use the link to join again. Thanks.
All right, see you later.
Thanks, bye. Right, okay, I haven't had any apologies for today, although we are few in number. So it's possible.
There's no apologies. I haven't had apologies either, sorry.
Oh, right, okay. And I don't think I've had any emails not through. So there we are. We are who we are. Can we first approve the minutes of the last meeting, please? Can anyone move those as correct?
I think they're correct.
Thank you, Kat. Do I have to have a seconder for the minutes?
No, it'd have to be a council. It'd have to be a council.
It has to be a councillor, not a co-op
Sorry.
member. Chris will do it. I didn't know that either.
Second and Mary.
Okay, okay, Chris and Peter. Thank you very much. Right, okay. So that does bring us to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is benefit take-up. And thank you, Jane, for being with us today.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you for the report that you've provided. I'm going to hand over now so that you can just kind of take us through this report and then we can have a discussion about it. Okay?
Okay. Well, I was asked to provide this report regarding benefits take-up and probably the problems with people claiming their benefits and that they're entitled to. And basically what happens is people have a lack of knowledge and understanding of the benefit system. They're quite frightened of it. They find it quite off-putting. And they start, even if they do then start to think, all right, I'll make inquiries, they tend to go to the Department for Work and Pensions. But the Department for Work and Pensions do not provide advice on benefits. When you ring them up, you get through to a call centre, and depending on the person that you speak to in the call centre, they will either signpost you, as they should be, to an independent organisation, or sometimes they try and be helpful and they offer advice, which often is inaccurate. And as a team, we've taken this up with the Department of Work and Pensions on a number of occasions when call centre staff are telling people that they're not entitled to a benefit when they sometimes can well be entitled to that benefit. So what we always say is, if in doubt, always claim the benefit, because the Department of Work and Pensions, the only thing that they can say is no. So that yes, there's a lot of underclaiming, and it's to do with the system, the complexity of the system, the lack of resources to claimants, the lack of knowledge, as I've already said, the fact that people don't think that they're entitled to claim benefits, and poor past experience. And that's, I'm not quite sure whether you're aware, but we're currently undertaking the Pension Credit Take-Up campaign. We've joined forces with a Swansea Carers Centre, West Glamorgan, Age Cymru West Glamorgan, Care and Repair Western Bay, Citizens Advice Neath Port Talbot, and Neath Port Talbot Welfare Rights. So we're covering the whole of Swansea and Neath Port Talbot. And I've had 2 cases in the past couple of weeks where people are entitled, in my opinion, are entitled to claim additional benefits, but they won't because of fear of losing what they've already got. And that's normally around the disability benefits, because people are being continually reassessed, and the fear of losing what they've already got outweighs and challenging the fact that they've got the wrong decision. So yes, there's a lot of fear, and also the stigma around claiming benefits. If you read the press, is always fraud and error. When you're ever looking at how much money is lost through benefit fraud, it's fraud and error. And that has been very well publicised. But when you look at the extent of underclaiming benefits, those £16 billion each year goes unclaimed. That is worth in Wales approximately £752 million, and that equates to 240 per man, woman and child. And that's just the means tested benefits that they can identify. So these are government's own figures, and that's primarily around all the means tested benefits, but not universal credit, tax credits and council tax reduction and disability benefits. And of course, if you can increase somebody's disability benefits, then you're likely to increase their entitlement to means tested benefits. So I think I've already given some examples, but 2 out of 5 pensioners don't claim pension credit. 1 in 7 working households do not claim help with the rent that they're entitled to. 80% of attendance allowance forms are sent to claimants and they are not returned, as are 20% of universal credit claims are started and not finished. And that is probably to do with how difficult the questions are and how long the forms are. So for example, disability benefit is around about 40 pages long. So what we do find with benefit take-up, one of the things that does work is more tailored response. Generally, if you provide that one-to-one support, then people are far more likely to engage and to take up on the benefits that they're entitled to, because as soon as they think that as soon as they know that they're entitled to, the fear and the stigma seems to go out of it. So as I said, like we're doing this pension credit take-up campaign. At the moment, we've had, it's sort of stagnated, unfortunately. We've only had 132 inquiries. 21 inquiries have been allocated to the welfare rights team. And out of those 21 inquiries, we've had 6 claims for attendance allowance, 1 DLA review, 10 pension credit claims, 3 claims for discretionary housing payment and 2 for carers allowance. The one thing that is quite positive though is people seem to have claimed their council tax reduction. And I'm not really quite sure whether that's because we've used Revs and Bens data, so people would have made a claim for housing benefit or council tax reduction for our letters to be generated. However, we have publicised in the Evening Post, and there's been a lot of other information on different platforms such as Facebook and social media and in other leaflets that the other organisations provide. But to date, so, I haven't had one council tax reduction claim form. Out of the 10 pension credit claims that we've met, Swansea have made, we've had 4 results. And a result of £8 per week is the lowest that we've had, up to £101 per week, which is a huge amount of money that somebody was underclaiming. So in total, those 4 claims are worth £222.83 in total between the 4 claimants, and arrears of £2,896.79. But it's not just to do with underclaiming of benefit, because if we can get people to claim the benefits that they're entitled to, they're more likely to spend that in their local economy. And there's what's called a multiplier effect. And when I first started doing this job, I'm sure that the multiplier effect was for every £1 raised in benefit, it was equivalent to £8 worth to the economy. But the only information I can find now is worth £4 to the local economy. I don't know why that is, but as you can see, it's still good for the local economy if we can increase people's income. What else are we doing? Yeah, so the pension credit claim is Monday to Thursday. It's a free phone helpline. It's for anybody who's age 66 or their partner is age 66. We focused on the older people because it's quite an easy group to target to begin with. pension credit is on, we can do it online. There's claim forms, you can do telephone claims. So we thought it was a bit of a quick hit. Yes, I'm not really quite sure if anybody's got any questions they want to ask me. Have I given an overview?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. You've taken us all the way through the report, so that's really great, Jane. And I'm sure there will be some questions and discussion. Les has got her hand up already, so do you want to fire away, Leslie?
Yeah, thanks. First a comment, going back to something you said about how papers and the media are very quick to comment on benefit fraud and incredibly slow to actually encourage people to claim the benefits. And what really bugs me about the way newspapers do it is the impression you get is the amount of money is humongous. If you compare it with most of the big business fraud that goes on, then a few £1,000 is a little teeny weeny drop in the ocean. And the other thing that really bugs me is they never give any impression about the percentage of people who actually are fraudulent compared with the millions who either just stick to what benefits they're entitled to, or like you're showing now, don't even claim what benefits they should be. That's one of my many rants off my chest. The point I wanted to make was going back to the DWP. You might have tried this already, but it strikes me from what you're saying, them giving bad advice is worse than them not giving any advice at all. So is there any chance you can say to them, don't do that, but always refer to another organisation for benefit advice?
We do that. We have raised incidences of where it's happened. The difficulty is for the Department of Work and Pensions is to actually pinpoint who's doing it. They're saying that their staff are trained not to do it, but we do know that it's happened. And us in the welfare rights team, we're generally second tier. So unless we have experience of it directly and we're involved in it, then we always do report back. But often we hear it's from other people that are feeding back to us as well. But if we come across it, then we will take note of the time that we rang the Department of Work and Pensions, what number we rang off, and then they can trace the call. And but their stance is that the contact centre staff shouldn't be doing this, but we do know that they are doing it. And I'm not really quite sure whether the person is doing it because they think that they're being helpful, but sometimes they're not being helpful at all. And sometimes you can have a right old ding dong with somebody on the phone because they're saying, oh, it's pointless you claiming this benefit, you're not entitled. But if you don't claim, then no decision has been made, so you can't challenge it. So my concern is if somebody phones up the Department of Work and Pensions and they get that negative reaction, then they're unlikely to go and claim. And that's when you think about it, the whole process. If you look at the appeals, how the appeals challenging decisions now with the appeals section. Before, if you had a negative decision, you used to lodge an appeal directly. The Department of Work and Pensions always used to revise that decision prior to the appeal. If the decision though didn't come out in your favour, then the appeal would carry on. Whereas now you've got mandatory reconsideration. So you challenge the decision, the Department of Work and Pensions make a mandatory reconsideration, which is negative usually. And that's what we found with the appeal service. Very few appeals lapsed. They were negative. They didn't change their mind until it got to appeal. Now with the mandatory reconsideration process, people are getting another letter saying, oh, you're not entitled, and don't go to the appeal stage. So if you think about 70% of decisions that are challenged are overturned, and that is the people that have gone on to appeal. There's a huge amount of people that don't even challenge the decision because the MR, the mandatory reconsideration, has come back negative, and people think that they've already challenged the decision properly, but they haven't. the system isn't really geared up for the claimant.
Okay, so to recap on that before I bring Chris in, then Kat, 70% of appeals are won,
Overturned,
but-
yeah.
but many negative decisions are not brought to appeal, and this is partly because of the mandatory reconsideration process kind of discourages people from bothering to go down the appeal road. Is that right?
Yes, because many people think that they've challenged the decision already.
But a mandatory consideration is not a full challenge to
No.
a benefit decision the way that an appeal is. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I double check then? That means these people are getting a letter and they're looking at it and thinking, oh, that's the result of my appeal, in effect.
They might think that
Yeah.
because they've asked them to look again, and it comes back saying a mandatory reconsideration notice. We've looked again and we've decided that we're not going to change your decision. And it does give the people the right to appeal, to challenge the decision further. But a lot of people don't. And a lot of people even get fed up with the process as well. So we've had a couple of cases where, you know, people just said, I've had enough. I've literally had enough.
I bet. And
I wonder.
just very quickly, I'm betting the letter they send, the top bit is all about negative, 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 and maybe in little writing, oh, but you can still carry on with your appeal.
That's generally on the last page. Yeah.
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 I'm talking mainly about disability benefits here, though. You know, that's where people get a bit overwhelmed and fed up. And that's probably because disability benefits are quite negative anyway. They're quite humiliating, you know, quite personal. So,
Okay, thanks, Jane. I've got Christine's hand up and Kat's hand up, but first I'm just going to take a moment of chair's privilege, just to think. I think it's worth dwelling on the fact that when people are already struggling on low incomes, they don't have a lot of headspace for this sort of thing, and it's very, very easy to get process fatigue, isn't it? And I think that probably doesn't help us, does it? So I can see us having a think maybe about what we can do to make the whole process just a little bit more streamlined for people. But obviously, we're not in charge of the overall benefit claiming system. That sits with the DWP. So Christine, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm horrified, Jane, at hearing the description of what benefits claimants, because I still call them benefits, not welfare. When the hell do we start calling it welfare? Right, all of that nonsense. Horrified whenever I'm reminded what people have to go to get the benefits to which they are entitled. It's not, you know, it's an entitlement to something, not given to people on a whim. Also, members who have also just summarised, you know, how small an amount, you know, there's huge media interest and propaganda, if you like, about fraud in benefits. I've worked both on supplementary benefit and I've worked the other side of the house, collecting national insurance and tax from companies and individuals. And I've seen firsthand the minimal amount that goes in fraudulent claims of benefit, and the vast amounts, the millions, if not billions of pounds that don't get collected or get avoided from being collected from the sort of, you know, the revenue side then. And it's appalling. I also remember, and I have to mention John Davis, because he and I worked in Oldway House in Swansea on when it was the Department of Health and Social Security, and I could feel him over my shoulder being outraged about this, as he was all of his life. At the time when I worked in supplementary benefit, and I will get on to, you know, something more pertinent in a minute, but I've got to get this out of my system. We had people called visiting officers who used to go out and visit every claimant every so often. And their job was to make sure that people were receiving the benefits to which they were entitled. They would go out and sit in someone's home and go through their claims with them to make sure that they were having everything to which they were entitled. Over the years, of course, it's changed. And I think there are two strands to this outrage that I keep calling it. There's a political strand, which I think is for us as councillors to consider and debate elsewhere. I think as far as the council is concerned, we probably have to home in on what I'd refer to as a practical strand. What is it that we can do to help people get the benefits to which they are entitled? I think the council tax letters that go out and the assorted bump that goes in, there's usually stuff about budgets. Maybe we should be sending things in that about claiming benefits to which you are entitled as well, because it may not just be the people themselves, the older citizens themselves, but their children, their grandchildren, their nieces, their nephews, their friends, who might also be able to give them, you know, a nudge and say, oi, you might be entitled to pension credits, or you might be entitled to other benefits. So I think as a practical way forward, that's something we should consider. What also struck me is that at the moment, we've probably got one of the largest conglomerations of older people taking place. We've probably missed the trick for the first round of vaccinations, but is there anything we can do? Even if it's just, I don't know, a pile of leaflets left in the places where people have to go for their vaccinations. There's bound to be something we can do to raise this as an issue. We're gathering together the over 80s, over 70s, so on and so forth. It just struck me when we were talking about it now, surely there's something we may be able to do if we're working in partnership with other organisations. It's a possibility. That's it really. I think as far as we're concerned, I mean, well done, Jane, for the stuff that you and your colleagues have done so far, and for your report. It's outraged me, but it's also, you know, at what DWP are doing, and how far they've fallen. How far have they fallen since the days of, you know, of the Department of Health and Social Security and Beveridge, as well as John Davis, will be spinning. That's about it. I'll shut up now. Thank you. Yeah,
okay. I can see Kat wants to ask a question or make a comment, but I will let Jane just respond to that first, if you like, Jane.
Okay, yeah, when it looks at benefit fraud, it's 0.7% of the budget, so it's very, very minimal. And then when you look at benefit fraud, it generally has to be repaid. It has to be, you normally get a criminal offence. So, you know, and when you compare that to tax evasion, which we know is costing 5.3 billion, you know, in comparison, there isn't any comparison. Coming back to health and the vaccinations, the problem that we've got at this moment with the vaccination, it would be great if we could have leaflets in the vaccination centres. But because of COVID, everybody's sort of saying we don't want people touching them. We have, however, got the carers centre got a contact in all the hospitals with the TV screens. So we're going to get the take-up campaign onto those TV screens. And yes, you know, the downstairs in the Civic Centre, when it is open to members of the public, there is information on our screens, or there certainly was. I'll have to check about claiming, you know, benefit claims and, you know, claiming your entitlements. But yes, you're right. There is definitely a divide, you know, like people are made to feel like scroungers as opposed to there's rights and entitlements. And people refer to people as benefit claimants. But when you look at across the board, we're probably all benefit claimants because we've probably all either claimed our child benefits, which is a benefit, or we expect to have our retirement pension, which is a benefit. And when you look at the breakdown,
eventually, Jane, we expect to have it eventually.
Eventually, yeah. But we don't think anything of it, do we? We have that expectation. So, you know, like people should have, it's their expectation that they're entitled to this benefit. And people think that benefit claimants are mainly made up of the people who are out of work, who are disabled or sick. But when you break down the figures, majority of benefit claimants are people who are actually in work. So it's topping up the low paid work, it's topping up 0-hour contracts, it's topping up secure employment. So if we had more secure employment, less 0-hour contracts, then there would be less benefit claimants as a whole. You know, if we paid people a decent wage, then a livable wage, then they wouldn't have to claim on benefits to top it up. So if you look at benefit claimants as a whole, as I said, the biggest claimants are pensioners. From that, it is people who are of working age. The disability benefits, majority of disability benefits get paid to people who are actually in work because it assists people in work. So it's the misconceptions, but that's been promoted by the media are to blame as well as the government, I think. So,
Definitely. Thank you very much, Jane. I've got Kat wanting to come in next. Fire away, Kat. Nice to see you.
Yep, as a benefit claimant. Yeah, everything you said is true, Jane. I love being called a scrounger because I have been called it many times. Every time the nice brown letter comes through the door, my heart is in my mouth, and so many flutters and stuff like that. It's horrible. Even though I know what it's going to say, it's just you're accepted for the next year or whatever, but it's still not a nice day when I get that one. Seeing everything on the media is just so disheartening. I've got so many friends that are all fighting to try and get what they need, but they're just not able to, or they're losing the will because they just haven't got the fight left in them. And being disabled is a fight in itself, just to survive most of the time without having to fight what you need. And yeah, I commend your work. It's really good, but I am not surprised by it. It's just reiterating what I already thought, but it's really good.
That's really helpful, Kat. I mean, obviously, we know we listen to the stats that Jane gives us, but there isn't any substitute for having someone in the room who's going through it all the time. We know, and we're really glad to have you on this committee for that reason. So what the big question for us, which I think we may or may not resolve today, is what can we do about it? What can we do about it? So at least locally, I would like to try and see how we can change the culture around benefit claiming to a matter almost of civic pride. So it's not a shameful or embarrassing thing to do. It's something that people are proud to do because it helps them to have a better life and to support the local economy more. And I think that this, particularly at this time, this post-COVID recovery period, when the local takeaways are suffering, local businesses, if everyone could afford to support them a little bit more, how much good would that do? The thing is that we are fighting against a massive tide of anti-claimant rhetoric and messaging all the time from the media, as well as the government. So, Les, you've got your hand up.
You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come back in. It was just about leaflets at the vaccination centre. I can understand the principle about you don't want to leave leaflets out and about because of the COVID infection and all the rest of it. But at least at the two main centres, maybe Gorsinon as well, they give out a leaflet at the end. So could they not give out this leaflet at the same time?
We could ask, have you got any contacts there that we could ask them to do that?
We will sort that out for you. Yeah, we'll make those contacts. I don't know how, but Joe the all-powerful will help, I'm sure. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, no, I can do that. I think Craig Gimler is sort of taking a lead, so he'll know somebody, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Really good idea, everybody. So that's the pension credit take-up campaign. Kat, you wanted to come in again?
Yeah, I was just going to say what Christine suggested about adding the bit in about benefits along with the council tax reduction and whatever. That would be really good because people would actually read that. And if the council are suggesting it, they might actually take stock of it and know that their council doesn't think that they're scroungers or that there's anything wrong with it.
I don't know whether there was a letter that went out last April, the year before, about a statement about where the money was spent. And if you had a look at it, like it was like 3/4 of it went on benefits. And what they failed to say that wasn't just benefits, it was pensions as well. So yes, it was quite remarkable how people. But one of the things that I have noticed since the pandemic, people have been phoning up quite angry, saying, "How do you expect me to live on this?" when they're having to claim universal credit. That's not enough. So it may have changed people's perceptions of what a benefit claimant is, because we've had people who have lost their jobs and having to live off £94 a week. And when I tell them that that's £20 a week more than what other benefit claimants are entitled to, because you've got the uplift within universal credit. But again, getting back to the media, like last week they were saying about the £20 uplift in universal credit, whether it's going to continue from April 2021. And again, the media and the politicians are saying we do not want to de-incentivise work. But the £20 uplift is for people in work who are claiming working tax credit, so you have to be working to get it. And it's universal credit, so that doesn't matter whether you're in or out of work. But the £20 uplift hasn't been given to those people who are carers and claiming income support, to the people on the legacy benefit who are sick and claiming income-related employment and support allowance, or claiming income-based job seekers allowance. They haven't given it to those people who are out of work. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane. I did in the last Recovery and Transformation PDC, I did share a couple of slides actually that compared the income for a single person under 25. So I've got 3 examples. I've got a 19-year-old, a 21-year-old and a 25-year-old. I've got these graphs. I don't have them handy today. I didn't think to bring them today. But they show what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation says somebody needs to live on, presuming that their rent is £62.50 a week, and it's probably more than that. And then the income that they actually get if they are working on minimum wage at that age, bump. And then the income that they get if they're on benefits at that age, bump. It's just, the difference is really quite shocking. So what this committee needs to work out, we've already got a really good action for today about the leaflets. That's a good idea with the vaccination centres. But other than that, what benefit take-up campaigns do we need to push for next? I know that everyone on this committee was aware about the pension credit take-up campaign because we brought a motion to council all about it. So what benefits would we want to do a push on in future? How can we promote the pension credit take-up campaign that is currently underway and help get that more traffic? And also, what can we do to generally instill more of a culture of proactive support for claiming, and try and counter the shame and anti-claimant narrative that we get from the media and the government. So the idea of putting something in with the council tax mailing, the budget mailing, I think that is a really good idea. We can take that forward to the cabinet now to ask them to include a paragraph that says something positive, encouraging people to claim their benefits. And we will work with Jane on the wording of that to make sure that it signposts people appropriately. So we need to think about what else we can do. I don't really think we're going to solve it today. Les, you want to come in again?
Yeah, just a quick question. I know there's a pension credit poster. Is there also a flyer, i.e. half size?
We've got an A5 flyer, Citizens Advice paid for it because we're doing it in conjunction with the other 5 organisations. So Citizens Advice paid for the flyers. So they've got 5,000 copies that are currently sitting in their offices, which we need to distribute.
Right, because if you could send that to me, I could at least send it on to one of the community centres in Town Hill Ward, and I'm pretty sure they probably print a few off themselves, at least so they've got something if somebody asks them to give out. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've either sent them a poster or I'm going to. So, and because I suspect, with the best will in the world, councillors, we've all got a lot on, and I'm sure some haven't thought about what they could do. So I'm going to do a reminder email to all councillors sometime this week and just say, see if you can put the poster up, see if you can tell your local community centres and the like, just to highlight it a little bit more.
Sorry, if we get the poster in a format that we can use on social media as well, we can push it out there, because it may, as I said before, it may not be the the people who need to claim the benefits themselves, but their friends and loved ones will also use social media. So can get the message across. Doesn't matter if it's from somebody else, as long as the message gets to them some way or another.
I'll attach the poster again, and Jane, if you send me the flyer, I'll attach that one as well.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay.
There should have been a social media post by the council promoting the campaign, so we should all be able to share that on. So
Yeah.
I'll ask comms to put that out again and let us know. Okay, Jane, you've got your hand up, but Ryland has as well. So I'm going to ask Ryland to come in, and then you can respond to everybody. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. In terms of publicising the various things we're talking about, obviously we need to consider that it's not just councillors that are going to be dealing with people that come into contact with benefit claims, etc. And I think we should be looking at making sure that Assembly members and MPs get copies of whatever publicity we're talking about, particularly social media stuff, because they've got substantial followings on social media. So if we could get, for example, Mike Hedges, I'm sure I could get him to put it up. He's got several thousand people in Swansea East that follow him. And I'm sure that the other Assembly members, Julie James and so on, have got the same. And I think we should make quite an effort to make sure that this is councillors, Assembly members
and MPs
is working together.
Yeah,
all 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I'm sure we can work together to get this all sent out to them. Thank you. Peter, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Just a statement, I suspect, of the obvious. Many of us, maybe all of us, are working in some way or other with local food banks. And food banks clearly are a direct means of communicating with people on low incomes and no incomes at all. Certainly the one I work with here in Sketty Park, something like, I don't know what the numbers are, but certainly of the order of 100 or more food parcels going out every week. I just thought if we could have leaflets, we can simply put them into the food parcels and distribute them directly that way to the recipients, and that would be extremely helpful. So just a tiny suggestion, but food banks are the obvious communication link. And the other people, of course, local area coordinators, who again have got links with all sorts of people in all sorts of circumstances, who again really ought to have a supply of these things for giving out. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, over to you, Jane.
Okay, the food banks, we were looking for contacts, because that had already crossed our minds that when they're giving out a food parcel they could enclose a leaflet, but it was trying to make those connections. Local area coordinators, they are fully aware of the Take Up campaign, and we have been working with them. Welsh Government, the reason why Citizens Advice have been paying for the funding is because Welsh Government have funded this, not necessarily the pension credit take-up campaign, but what they have funded is a benefit take-up campaign working collaboratively. So when I approached Swansea Citizens Advice Swansea Neath Talbot to ask if they'd join in with this venture, because we knew that we couldn't deal with it alone. They said that they'd received funding from Welsh Government to do collaborative work in, so this, you know, fitted in quite well. And Welsh Government are fully behind benefit take-up. They fully appreciate the importance of benefit take-up. They're looking at it as a whole. They're also looking at the advice provision, because that's the one thing that people need, is the support and the advice to be able to access their benefits. So they are looking at that. And Welsh Government have commissioned training across Wales. So it's for people who aren't dealing with the benefits on a day-to-day as part of their work remit, but they may come into contact with individuals, and it's called dangos.cymru or dangos.wales, and you can book on that course through Eventbrite, and we are helping Dangos in delivering some of those courses across Wales. So you know, I'm more than happy for you to distribute to Mike Hedges and the other AMs and MPs. That would be great, because the more publicity we can get about this pension credit take-up campaign, the better.
Right, okay, thanks, Jane. So I think our first priority is to publicise the current pension credit take-up campaign. We can make connections with food banks. I'm sure we can get leaflets out to food banks. That'll be an easy thing for us to do. And then next, perhaps in a working group session, we'll need to talk about what benefits you think we should be focusing on in the future, and also just share our own ideas about how we can develop more of a pro-claiming culture here in Swansea. So that's something for us all to kind of think about with the context of the report that Jane has shared with us today, and to come back to for future discussions. Is that okay if we leave that there for today?
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Jane. Nice
thank
to see
you all for having me, and I no doubt see you around the Civic Centre at some point in the future.
Okay. No, more like this, still like this. Bye, Jane.
Okay, bye.
Right, I'm just going to send Joyce a message to say we're ready. Thanks for coming back, Angie. And okay, so I'm sure that Jeremy and Joe are going to be capturing the actions from that meeting. We've got a few good things that we can do straight away, and a lot more to think about going forward into the future. So we have Angie with us from Room to Grow, and just waiting for Joyce to come back to us from Lend and Tend. And can I ask whether committee members all received the link to the video of Joyce's presentation about Lend and Tend and have had a chance to have a look at that prior to the meeting? Did you have that, Kat? No. Okay. Well, it's worth having a look at later on. I mean, it's I don't think it says anything that we can't just explain, but it's a nice little video. And yeah, it's very nice. So it explains the background to Lend and Tend. Joyce herself living in flats with quite short tenancies, having to move quite often in London, and never being able to enjoy a garden, did get into a sharing arrangement, and she started posting on social media about how much she was enjoying borrowing someone else's garden for growing vegetables and stuff like that. And a lot of people were very interested in this and said, I want to get in on garden sharing. What do I do? So yeah, she actually ended up developing a whole website for linking up lenders and tenders. So people who've got a garden that they can't manage themselves, with people who want a garden and don't have one. She makes the point in her presentation that everyone always thinks of older people, people who had a house with a garden that they enjoyed, but then as they've got older and frailer, they've not been able to keep on top of it. But actually a lot of houses with underloved gardens belong to people who are just really busy, working long hours and don't have the time. Perhaps people who've developed health conditions or disabilities and find it harder than they used to get into the garden. And she goes into some description of the sort of social benefits, you know, for everybody, intergenerational, you know, and people sharing knowledge about growing and just supporting each other with it. So through the Lend and Tend website, people can register as a lender or a tender potentially, and although it is free and it's on a donation basis. I think they have a suggested donation of a certain amount, which I'll ask Joyce to clarify, but anybody can register. And what Joyce has shown us is that actually there are some people in our county, in Swansea, who have already registered on Lend and Tend, but it's not very well publicised. So that's an overview of Lend and Tend while we wait for Joyce to come back. She said if I sent her a message, she'd be here in seconds. She's not, so she's obviously got distracted with something, which is fine. I'm sure she'll be with us soon. So in the meantime, we could ask Angie to explain a little bit about Room to Grow. Over to you, Angie. Tell us about your project, please.
Hi. Oh, kick the laptop straight away there. Sorry. So yeah, my name's Angie. I am one of the owners of Hugo on Brunamore Road. And in the first lockdown, I set up a project called Room to Grow, which is basically trying to pioneer the idea that front garden spaces can be used to grow food and pollinator plants and that kind of thing. And often, so I live in Bryn Mill, in Uplands Bryn Mill, and a lot of the front garden spaces here are just tarmacked or stones or astroturf. They aren't thriving growing spaces at the moment, and there's various problems that occur because of this, whether that's increased likelihood of flooding, there's a lack of drainage, there's obviously an aesthetic issue in the area where things aren't looked after and then they go into further states of disrepair or mess and rubbish and that kind of thing. And also there's the issues that Mary mentioned, that people might have front gardens that they can't look after, or they don't have the time or the knowledge or the confidence to look after. So we started a project where we built custom raised bed planters that went into the fronts of people's gardens, because there's you don't need much space for an allotment, and there's a dual benefit of using what would be wasted space, but also brightening the look of the street at the same time, so increasing the aesthetic around the place. Also then you've got those interactions, because they're front garden spaces, constantly people were asking what we were doing. We ran a pilot project last year where we installed 6 of these allotment gardens in front gardens around Uplands and Bryn Mill. And people who lived in the houses had varying levels of involvement. When we first started, we told them that they didn't have to do anything at all, in case it put them off because they didn't have time or the confidence and skills. But running into the next phase of the project, people might want to share their garden, so have some involvement, but have volunteers help them with it, and we can pair them up in the same way as Lend and Tend do back gardens, but we only focus on front-facing gardens because of that dual purpose of the project, where we're trying to improve the look and aesthetic of the area, and we find that front-facing gardens kind of spread the sustainability message more, because you can see it, it's very interactive, and yeah, there's a huge community connection when it's on the front side, and we don't have to worry about access and all that kind of thing in the back gardens then. So so we ran the pilot in the months of May to October. Well, it's still going, obviously, but this year then we're running phase 2, which will be a green corridor effect, where we focus our efforts on 3 main streets in Uplands and Bryn Mill, with the idea that we could have a greater visual impact to further spread this idea that people could use their front gardens in this way. And through our website, we have an option where you can say if you've got a space that's spare, the front garden that you want to offer to the project, Also, people who live in flats in the same way, or don't have garden space, can ask to be paired up with a garden as a volunteer for that site. And also then we do our own pairing with people who just want to volunteer, and then we might find them a suitable garden to look after in the area. Yeah, so that's Room to Grow in a nutshell. It's mainly with food growing in mind, just trying to reignite the skills that have been kind of lost in the last couple of generations, where a lot of people used to grow their own at home, but now we're all a bit scared of it. So we're just trying to kind of get people back into that and that self-sufficiency, and yeah, obviously the financial benefits of growing your own food at home. And we'll be looking into different things that people can do on the windowsill even, and hydroponic growing and all that kind of stuff this year. So yeah, that's Room to Grow in a nutshell. It's focusing as well on looking at pollinators and biodiversity in the area. So it's not just about food; it's a kind of the wider spectrum of things as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angie. So Joyce, just while we were waiting for you to come back, I did whiz through your project for the benefit of anyone who hadn't managed to see the little film which you've very kindly shared with us. So everyone is now aware of what you do with Lend and Tend. Now we've heard from Angie as well. So the committee had really wanted to do something to try and promote garden sharing in Swansea. Our first priority is to try and free up council land for community food growing, and that is something that we are working on as we speak. You know, Jo is drafting up a policy that we've all kind of discussed. And then the next thing is, how do we get onto this garden sharing thing? So Room to Grow started off just in uplands. Are you thinking about branching out away from uplands now, Angie? Are you looking at going sort of county-wide?
Yes, so we've had lots of people sending messages all around Swansea, and initially, because we had a very small kind of local budget to work with, from crowdfunding and a little bit of council support, and so we had to kind of focus our energy on trying to do the impact, the highest level of impact. We are now fielding some requests from around, and we're going to start a green ambassador kind of concept where it can almost franchise into the other wards. And because the project's so young, we're working out how best it can be managed from further afield, so it's not us running around like headless chickens, but instead engaging people, setting up green ambassadors on streets wherever they are across Swansea, giving those green ambassadors resources, potentially a allotment starter kit that they can do in their front garden, and then kind of empowering them to get other people on their streets involved. So yeah, we're fielding a few responses from Sketty, Calais, Mawr, which is outside of Swansea, obviously, West Cross, and that kind of thing. So kind of starting to put the feelers out a bit wider now.
Okay, fab, thank you. Peter, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Very interested, Angie, fascinating in terms of what you're telling us. And I represent Sketty Ward, and I think next door to Uplands, I think we'd be very interested in getting involved with that. But what particularly interested me was your focus on front gardens. People tend not to think about front gardens as a location, particularly for vegetable growing. I've got a reasonably sized front garden, and I use it entirely for perennial ornamentals, bulbs and things of that kind. I sort of pride myself on a massive colour each summer, which I'm working on again for this coming summer. But what is good about focusing on front gardens is for a variety of reasons. Of course, over the last few years, many front gardens have been tarred over, macadammed, whatever, for car parking or just for ease of management, for maintenance. And of course, there's a flood risk problem associated with this. We all know this. There's a drainage problem, and the more front gardens are tarred over, the greater the flood risk when we get heavy rainfall, as increasingly we are and will continue so to do. So I'm really pleased that you're trying to develop front gardens in particular. And in terms of, are you just aiming purely at vegetable growing? You also mentioned benefits for pollinators, for biodiversity more generally. So I would guess you would be trying what, some kind of mixed planting of veg interplanted with pollinating flowering plants of various sorts, that kind of thing, because that would create the ideal mixed combination in terms of good biodiversity and wild plant management of our front gardens. And are you doing anything on back gardens? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so basically the short answer is that front gardens are our focus. The reason being is that it's for the funding. So what we're doing generally is funded by our fundraising, and we're trying to install these raised bed planters that we're making using the volunteers. So we're going to pay for the resources to do that. So for us to maximise the outreach and kind of getting the message across about food growing and trying to have the shake up the community the most, we're focusing on the fronts, because it is really it's such a simple concept, but like you say, no one thinks to use the garden in that way, and it's kind of quite exciting for the community. It's blowing their minds that we would consider using the front. So yeah, for us, the only back garden that we are thinking about using is someone has a hard standing that we might use, put a greenhouse in that we could start seedlings off to try and grow the seedlings ourselves locally as well, without having to put miniature greenhouses in the front. Now, you said about the pollinators and do we do other things within one garden? For the pilot study, because we were using maybe one house per street, we tried to cram a lot into that space, at least 2 raised bed planters of varying sizes depending on the gardens, obviously, and then we had raised tomato planters as well, with deeper soil that we could use for potatoes and things this year. We then did some companion planting and made sure that we had plants for pollinators to come to visit the gardens, so that we could obviously pollinate the vegetable crops. And so we're coming from a kind of permaculture, organic point of view, where the gardens and food growing isn't purely human focused, obviously. So we have to allow a certain amount of produce to be eaten by what you might call pests, but garden insects. And we had, Mary will laugh, we increased the population of cabbage white butterflies in the area for sure that last year. But on a serious note, without insects and pollinators, there is no food. So I think we're trying to really try and engage the community in growing practices that are beneficial for the environment, because so many even agricultural methods or even ornamental gardens, actually, if you're putting pesticides and slug pellets down to protect your, not you sorry, but you know, if the community are and they're only focusing on how it looks, then actually their garden might have a more negative effect on the local environment than a positive one. So we're trying to get a lot of ideas into a small space. So this year, the green corridor will span 3 streets, and we're going to have 30 allotment gardens, which will be food focused, but then interspersed along the streets will also be the front gardens purely dedicated. Potentially we could have marigold front gardens. There's one in Riddens Park, which is beautiful, or lavender gardens and those kind of things that are like butterfly gardens, bee gardens, which again are really hot topics in the community. People are really, you know, trying to save the bees and promote pollinator. Wild meadows on lawns. These might be easy wins for the project to have a big visual impact, but not be maybe as high maintenance as the vegetable growing as well. But it's looking at the bigger picture and seeing that, you know, for food success, you need to think more than protecting, you know, the crops that you're growing. You need to be looking at the wider environment and attracting the right insects for success as well.
That sounds great. And have you got sign up for your proposed green corridors?
We do. Yes. So we've got an active Facebook and Instagram. We've also got an email address and a website, which is roomtogrow.wales, where you can pop your email address in there and it will come through to us on the mailing list. So the action plan currently is Riddins Park Road, King Edward's Road, and I can't never say it, Mary, come on, Gwydir Crescent. I'm Welsh.
Gwydir. Everyone does say Gwydir, but actually it is Gwydir, speaking as a
Gwydir.
non-Welsh speaker.
Every time. I don't know why I picked that street. But basically those three kind of connect Hooga, which is my organic cafe, to the heart of Upland. So it's a nice little street with a food story, and we'll be documenting how to use the produce in different recipes and engaging people with what to do with British produce and that kind of thing. So there's a bit of a wider story going on as well. But we are we fundraised for the Green Corridor. Sorry if I'm digressing at all. We fundraised for the Green Corridor, so we've got a set budget to spend on that area specifically, and then we've got a little bit of wider budget for doing the outreach into other areas. But it will be more in the Green Ambassador kind of idea, where we'll kind of give active people in the community a bit of a startup pack. That again has to be used only in front gardens for visibility, and then the Green Ambassador on a street in Sketty, for example, would receive 2 allotment packs for the street, along with up to 30 smaller planters that could line the street, but and have a kind of this corridor effect without the larger cost of a full allotment garden, if that makes sense. So the smaller planters might be herb planters, or for people who are have less knowledge and just want to be involved or want to brighten the front of their garden with something, but maybe not the full install. Of course, these are these are things that we can pay for, but hopefully people will then be inspired to go off their own backs and do their own front gardens, not wait for Room to Grow to come and do theirs. We don't want to create that kind of culture, but yeah, we just want to try to encourage people to use the front spaces in ways that they haven't before, and depending on which way they're facing and the light and all different things like that, we'll pick what's most suitable for which garden.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks, Angie. So the focus of Room to Grow is basically accessing underused front gardens, whether the householder themselves wants to get involved or not. And of course they are welcome to get involved, but they don't have to. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then from anywhere in Swansea, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who wants to do a bit of gardening could volunteer with Room to Grow, and then they would be out there tending these plots in people's front gardens. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So the thing with this is it's participating in Room to Grow, and then what happens to the produce? Can you explain that?
So the produce basically is split between the person who, if it is a produce garden, the person who owns or lives in the property who's donated the site. It's also split between the person who is doing the tending or helping, volunteering, supporting on that garden. And then there's a third element to what we do, which is trying to grow food for the local community or people in need or local needs. So there'll be call outs throughout the year for people to donate produce that they've grown that will be then donated to places like Matthew's House or the community fridge or a local cause that matters to the Room to Grow community or the wider community. So this is kind of embedded from the start, that there'll be an expectation if you're involved that at some point in the year you'll be asked to kind of gather up or provide produce for different things that we're doing, so we can have a wider outreach as well. I think so. So in the pilot, when I started, I thought, oh, 30% is going to be this, 30% is going to be that, and I was quite being a little bit too rigid on it. But what happened then was that someone might have given their garden and had time to be involved, but felt like the produce wasn't theirs because it had this percentage on it. So instead, we've stepped away from that and kind of loosened it up to be a share with this kind of expectation as well. If there's surplus produce or we are doing an event for the community, always for community benefit, we then they can pick from their garden and bring it. So one of the things that we did last year was ask the gardens to all pick some produce that was ready at the time, and then we did a little produce sale at Hooger, and donated all of the money raised from the Pay As You Feel sale to Swansea Cancer Centre and Swansea Women's Aid, which were nominated by the community as well. So so we were kind of closing the loop as well on what happened with the produce, and it got the word out with what we were doing more.
Okay, thanks. So essentially, Room to Grow it's a community growing project, and produce gets shared around for general community benefit. Whereas Lend and Tend is a model more where somebody can register as a tender, and once they're matched with somebody, that is their own garden that they obviously in partnership with the owner of the garden. I think they perhaps have more individual ownership over that than they would have by working through the Room to Grow project. Is that right?
Yes. So it would be great to maybe see what other spaces we could free up, or get awareness of the two projects in association with one another. Just something I might like to mention to you, Angie, is I was recently contacted by the National Park City Foundation, and I participated in their online festival last year, and I did a sort of mutual blog post about freeing up front gardens. And there's a huge amount of awareness now on getting people to, for the reasons of improving biodiversity and prettifying, grey tarmac spaces. There's a lot of encouragement for people to lift up just, a few paving slabs or a few bricks down the centre lane of where your car is parked. Because in normal times, when we take our cars away from our driveways and go to work for 9 hours a day, the front garden's getting all of that sunshine and access to grow. And I did a post about planting low-level plants. So for reasons of not just food growing, but it might be something to encourage people to, lift a few paving slabs up in the front of their driveways to plant low-lying plants, because that might be half a dozen doors away from somebody up the road who does have a vegetable patch. And like you say, improving those pollinators' habitats is always a really good idea. And that doesn't really maybe cost your organisation that much money, because you're actually taking things away and allowing them to grow, rather than having to, build a planter or build a site. So I would be more than happy to sort of direct people your way if they're not, wanting to necessarily garden share, but wanting to free up their space.
Yeah, that's great.
That sounds great. I can see lots of ways in which you two can share resources with each other and signpost to each other, I'm sure. In Uplands, where Room to Grow started, a lot of the front gardens, it's not paving slabs that you can just lift one or two. It's a great old,
concrete.
It's just tarmac. It's just tarmac or concrete that's been poured down. And that's because we have a lot of student houses. And I use that term advisedly. I don't mean HMOs. We have a lot of HMOs, but most of them are student houses. So I think, Room to Grow is a really great way of trying to get more stuff growing in those spaces. I think that we can. Yeah, go on, Angie.
In one of the properties, we did actually lift some stone and had access to drainage. Now, it all depends on who owns the property and who's given permission for this and that, and that's kind of one of the landscapes that we have to navigate. We don't want it to be exclusively to homeowners, and obviously there's levels of permission that we need to do various things. There's also a few issues with ownerships of assets that we have. So if we're providing planters that can be moved, then sometimes we can get funding for that. Other times, if it's fixed, why should people pay for us to develop other people's front gardens? So it's a bit of a tricky thing, and we're just trying to focus on the positives and not get too bogged down in that kind of thing. But basically, if partly the reason that we did the raised bed planters at the beginning also was because people were a little bit nervous of the project. It's quite different, and maybe they wanted to be involved, but they weren't ready to let us pull up their garden entirely yet. However, the hope is that maybe stage 1 is to have a portable planter installed in your front garden, and stage 2 of the agreement after 18 months and you've seen what can be done, that maybe you'd be willing to pull up the slabs. But we're on a bit of a journey of kind of trying to get more mainstream thinkers thinking about growing. So it's kind of going in softly, and also trying to. People have said, oh, why don't you use reclaimed materials and this kind of thing, and where we absolutely encourage it, and all of our wood is responsibly sourced. We do purposely use new wood so that it has quite a charming look to it, so that it appeals to the masses. So people who don't normally get involved, maybe because they don't like that higgledy-piggledy style, which I personally do, they're up for kind of decorating their houses with these planters as well. So it's seen as a beautifying process as well. So we're just trying to show, how nicely you can do it. However, I want everybody to do it, so I don't really mind how it looks, but that's the kind of reason for us building in that way.
Okay, thank you. So I'm obviously a little bit ahead of my fellow committee members because I knew about both these projects long before they did. So I've had a bit more of a chance to sort of think about how both of these projects can help us promote garden sharing in Swansea. I have a question for Joyce. Joyce, when people register for Lend and Tend, when they register as lenders, do they provide information about whether the garden they are not currently using much is at the back or at the front?
Yes, so there's a questionnaire I ask people to fill in with questions you can't skip. What's that word?
Compulsory.
Compulsory, thank you.
Yeah.
Compulsory questions. And the compulsory questions do include how does one access the site? Is it front? Is it back? Do you access via going into the house? Do you access via a side gate or going through the garage or whatever method? My earlier questionnaires did sort of basically narrow down to what kind of animals you don't like or do like, what kind of colour jackets do you not like people are wearing or whatever. But I do have a section for which you can specify the kind of person that you're interested in meeting, or the kind of community that they might be part of, or what you would specifically like in a patch match, or what you would not specifically like in a patch match. So some people specify things like no animals, or no smokers, or nobody with any children, so there's lots of different parameters that you can suggest, well, what both parties can suggest, but specifically mentioning the garden accessibility is a compulsory question.
Okay, fab, thank you. So I've got Ryland wanting to ask a question, and then David.
Most of the wards that you mentioned that are currently part of the scheme seem to be geographically concentrated on the west, plus Mawr, I suppose. If a ward in the east wanted to be part of these schemes, would that be okay? Because I'm, very interested in Trans Hamlet putting itself forward.
So that
would be for you, Angie.
Yeah. So I mean, the beauty of what Joyce has done is that it's UK wide. So you've got kind of your parent going up like that. Now, Room to Grow is a bit younger, and we're still kind of working out some teething issues with how do we expand in a way that doesn't leave sites untended. So we have to have a level of commitment for the expansion that this green ambassador idea comes in there. So say you had a really keen, or someone like yourself, Ryland, who lives in Llansamnet, wants it on their street, wants it in their area, then we almost franchise out to you or associate with you. You become a green ambassador for Room to Grow. We can give up a little bit of startup budget for that green ambassador street pack, like I mentioned, where you'd get 30 miniature planters and enough resources to do 2 full allotment front gardens. That's soil, that's wood, compost, everything that you would need, seedlings to get you started. Also, within that pack, then there would be some water butts, some bird houses, and some bug hotels. Now, that then would be gifted to you as a green ambassador with with an agreement in place that you're not going to just go and put that all in your back garden and that kind of thing, those management things in place. But then the idea is that that green ambassador starts Room to Grow in their own area, starts connecting with their local community, their neighbours, and then in the same thing that we've seen here in Bryn Mill, it's such an interesting project that we're inundated with people who either want us to come to their garden, or they want to volunteer, or they want to know more or be involved. So the hope would be that would happen for you in Llansamlet. Then any support that you needed, questions or training days, then we could come up to support what's going on there. But currently with the setup that we've got, we've got no staff at the moment, really. We're quite young in the project, so it would be based on these ambassadors helping to make it happen, and then our volunteer coordinators a bit of time going into making sure that you've got the support you need to make it a success in your area then.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Roland. David?
Interesting ideas. I'm interested in how you're delivering this at the moment, given the current restrictions. Back gardens which are only accessible through the house, and front gardens which under the Welsh Government's definition are also included as part of the house, in which meeting is prohibited.
Okay, do you want to go first, Joyce, and then
Yeah.
Angie?
So at the moment, I don't know of anybody that is actually, well, they haven't communicated to me that they are actually seeing each other. And I have specifically said on the website that I'm following the guidelines as published on the NSALG website, which is the National Society of Allotment and Leisure Gardens. So what I'm doing at the moment is trying to foster the new relationships by, keeping people talking and offering sort of Zoom chats between lenders and tenders. But yes, I'm basically just regurgitating government advice and trying to keep up with what's being published in the areas that my lenders and tenders in. I'm not under any accounts suggesting people do go ahead and meet each other. There is a minority of people there are a minority of numbers who have quite large land spaces, and in the easing of the second or third, one of the gaps between the lockdowns, I can't remember if it was the second or the third, there was a garden near Manchester which was accessible via a private stream, and they managed to keep garden sharing in the lockdown. But yeah, so at the moment I'm basically reiterating local advice and not, suggesting anything to the contrary.
Okay, so
the organisation that you referred to, whose advice you're quoting, an English-based organisation. The fact that the Welsh regulations are different.
I believe they are UK-wide. I might be wrong, but I do believe they're UK-wide.
Sorry, whether the organisation is UK-wide or not, I'm hazarding a guess that it's based in England.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid.
Well, generally speaking, organisations in England are English orientated in terms of regulations and don't actually recognise that Wales actually runs it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So
currently the regulations are pretty much the same. We've got alert level 3, we've got alert level 3 and alert level 4 all over the UK, and Wales alert level 4 isn't that different to England's alert level 4, and then some parts of England are only in alert level 3, and some of them are even lower. So I think regardless of where an organisation is actually based at this time, if they have a UK-wide focus, they will be having to keep up with the different regulations in all the different alert level areas. And yeah, I think basically it's just, unfortunately, if you're tending a garden that's part of someone else's house, lockdown rules are going to confound that, aren't they? You know,
Absolutely.
I think that's. Angie, do you want to answer David's question about how you're operating during lockdowns?
Yeah, sure. So we've liaised with obviously the local councillors and the local police who've deemed that food growing activities are legal at the moment. Obviously, there's strict social distancing and volunteering rules in place. So we are not going out in groups more than 3. At the moment, we're not actually going out in groups at all, but that's partly due to the growing season. But our activities are outside. Everyone has to volunteer. If you break a rule within the volunteering, then you kind of off the project. So it's very strict in terms of you have to wear a mask, you have to wear gloves, you have to keep your distance. And our activities are outside. One of the benefits of them being front garden spaces is that you, and it fits in with one of our rules, which is kind of partly a safeguarding rule and partly a COVID-friendly rule, is that nobody is to be invited into anyone's home, no one's to use the toilet, no one's to be offered a cup of tea. Those things are in place not only because of COVID and those risks, but also the safeguarding of volunteers on site. So those rules will continue in the post-COVID. In terms of what you were saying about meeting in the front gardens, classifying as being in someone's house, as I mentioned, we've had confirmation from the police that what we're doing is okay and that it's allowed and that we're not doing anything wrong. Now, I don't know, Mary.
I'm sorry, that's not correct.
The reason why the police...
That's the point I'm making about the distinctions. In Wales, the garden, front and back, is considered to be part of the house.
The police advice...
It's not about the access to the house, it is the house.
Yeah, the police advice was that as long as householders were not meeting up, so the householder isn't coming out and meeting with the volunteer is simply allowed access from the curbside to the front garden for the voluntary food growing, and they said that was allowed. But I can see our legal advisor offering to come in. Hi, Craig.
Hi. Yes, David's making a good point, because I was hearing Angie saying this and I was concerned, because I do advise trading standards and our other departments on the Health Protection Wales regulations. David's partly right. I do have concerns about Angie, when you said 3 persons are going out together, I'm not criticizing, because I'm not about that, okay? But do you consider this to be sort of, it's not a commercial aspect, but like a farming instance, and that's how you can get around it? Because if it's simply grown in someone's front garden, I don't think you are compliant with the health protection regulations.
The reason why the police gave their advice that it was all right was because it's community volunteering. That's what it is. It's community volunteering. So, I mean, I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share what the police shared with us in terms of that advice. You know, but I think also it's worth bearing in mind that as lockdowns have changed and rules have changed and things like that, we need to make sure that Room to Grow is compliant with the latest rules, and that maybe the police advice needs to be sought again as a refresher, perhaps before the next growing season starts off. And also, since during the recent changes of rules, Room to Grow hasn't actually really been operating because it's been winter and there hasn't been any growing going on. So I think the important thing is to make sure that once Room to Grow does start up and volunteers are in a position to be going out again or need to be going out again, that the police advice is sought at that time to make sure that they're compliant with the rules at that time. So it's a fallow period right now, isn't it? There hasn't been any Room to Grow activity since well before Christmas, which is when Alert Level 4 started. And before that, the advice was that community volunteering was allowed, and growing food in front gardens for this particular project counted as a reason to be out and about, as long as social distancing was observed. So there hasn't been any Room to Grow activity during the current rules, lockdown rules. And as it starts up again, we'll go back to the police and check again. You know, I think that's all fine. But we've got a longer term focus with this committee. We're looking at how, you know, we can't just plan everything around lockdown. You know, we need to think about, well, how do we want to be moving forward when it isn't lockdown, and how do we want to be using this project to support community growing in Swansea? So that's the more substantive thing that I want us to discuss. Peter has his hand up, and
I think Mary, the point I'm making is these are both outstanding projects which I would support, and I'm more or less raising a caveat about that we need to be aware and not lead people into supporting a scheme that actually unwittingly gets them into trouble. I would also say that my questions were directed to our two guests, not to the chairman of the PDC, Mary, to speak on their behalf and offer the defence. I'm asking them what they're doing, not you.
I understand that, David, but Room to Grow is an uplands project which is in my ward, and Angie has sought my advice specifically in order to collaborate with the police and make sure that they
have an interest in the matter. So you can't have an interest in the matter, can you?
Yeah, no, maybe so, but I can help to convey the advice that I have helped Angie to seek from the police. I can do that at least as her ward councillor in this meeting.
And just to confirm, we haven't had any Room to Grow activities since September. Our Instagram is live and kicking because I've got my own growing garden and I take photos for that. So we are active because that's important as part of the project. And we're gearing up with the hope to start the Green Corridor. However, as you rightly say, it will all depend on how things go, how the easing of the lockdown goes. There's certain things that we can do. Now that we've got a workshop that we can be in there solo, those kinds of things. So it's not detrimental to the project at the moment. However, things have changed. You are right, in December with Tier 4. So we are kind of going to navigate that over the next month, 6 weeks to a month, and going forward. So.
Okay, thanks. Peter wants to come in and he's needing to leave soon.
So thank you, Mary. Very, very quickly, because as I've indicated, I need to leave for another meeting at 5 o'clock. I just wanted to make a simple point, perhaps a slightly unusual one, and that is I'm heavily involved with working with asylum seekers here in Swansea in terms of support and maintenance. And quite a number of them, mainly from El Salvador in Central America, have agricultural and farming backgrounds. They're not permitted, of course, to work for paid purposes at the moment because of government regulations, but they're very interested in becoming actively involved in something that will demonstrate their commitment. And a number have said that they would be interested in volunteering for the kind of work that Angie's group and maybe Joyce's, in terms of her Lend and Tend, are interested in. So I'd simply, away from this meeting, I can send details perhaps, act as a contact perhaps, of people who might have some experience and be willing to help with front garden maintenance. But sorry, I have to go now. Apologies to everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. So, yeah, obviously any project that the council promotes and supports has to be COVID compliant. I think that really goes without saying, doesn't it? Yeah, Joyce, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to pass on to was it John? Sorry, he's gone now, so I didn't know he had to go immediately. But yeah, part of my hopes for lenders and tenders is that it does offer an opportunity for people new to communities, and particularly people who don't really necessarily have roots in that community, to in some way lay roots in the future. Specifically in bigger cities like Cardiff, Manchester, London, where people aren't very sort of settled, and there's a lot of movement within the places. So yeah, I'd be very happy to talk further on that later on in this year, particularly when we know a little bit more, or maybe can hope for a little bit better news on the situation of things.
Thank you. Thanks, Joyce. And Joyce, we saw from the presentation that you shared with us before the meeting that anyone can sign up with your website and there isn't a fee, but that there is an optional fee. There is a donation amount for people who are registering to pay to help cover costs. How much is that, please?
I've written on the website that the suggested donation is £12.99, but it doesn't, when you click on the link to donate, it doesn't specify that you have to pay, that you can write any amount in. You can put 50p, you can put £50, whatever you can afford.
Okay, thank you. So I think that both these projects offer a lot of potential, don't they? What I'm wondering is if Room to Grow is ready to be kind of branching out into front gardens away from the geographical area that they've been focusing on so far, perhaps in other parts of Swansea, then maybe Room to Grow could register as a tender with Lend and Tend. And as Joyce gets front gardens, if people register as lenders saying that they have front garden space available, that could potentially be a patch match, couldn't it? I think that if we as a committee can think about how the council can promote both these projects, perhaps putting a bit of publicity behind Lend and Tend. There are already a few people in Swansea registered on there. I think there's one lender registered and a few potential tenders registered. So perhaps a bit of local promotion would help. Obviously, we wouldn't do that until the lockdown rules enabled it. So we need to keep an eye on those rules and kind of be ready with that promotion when that's available. And also, I guess, as lenders and tenders get matched up on Joyce's website, there's the potential for her to signpost them to Room to Grow for advice about growing food and connecting into local food growing networks and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm desperately sort of happy to look for organisations to sort of foster relationships and to keep it going, because Lend and Tend is not so far something that I've thought about sort of franchising out per se, because it's not really anything that I actually own. I don't sort of have any ownership of these gardens. Essentially, it's a befriendment scheme that I started up with the express purpose of introducing people who want to share gardens. So yeah, if any kind of community projects that can sort of fulfill the position of a community ambassador in the area is great, because in normal times I'd when possible go and visit communities in Liverpool, or I went to one community in Frankfurt because I happen to be in Germany, but obviously I can't travel, and it would be great to have more people like-minded to help me sort of spread the word and give people ownership to take it forward and do what they want with it in their communities. I mean, the kind of utopian goal for in the future is for people to, you know, set up baskets in the front of their gardens and, you know, have a pay what you can, or like an honesty box for excess vegetables, or donate those kind of things to community food banks in the more sort of verdant months. Yeah, so there's so much potential for people to do different things with it in the community in future, but at the moment there's only me really, and a few sort of volunteers from time to time, and the only real way that I actually kind of put the word out is by partnering with community events, and so far they've only sort of been based in London, so any sort of cross-pollination of ideas in other parts of the world would be super.
Okay, well, I think the committee's perhaps got some work to do now, thinking about how we can go about promoting both these projects, you know, lockdown rules allowing. I think people can register as lenders and tenders and perhaps start to be matched and start to communicate with each other in readiness for being allowed to actually get digging. And, you know, if Room to Grow wants to register as a tender, you know, and people want to start offering out their front gardens, that's something that can also start being discussed, can't it? So.
Historically, it doesn't happen overnight either. It's taken me months to get two parties like lenders and tenders together after sort of a long-term sort of interaction with both lender and tender, sort of supporting their conversation process. And I mean, I'm kind of glad this Tier 4 has happened at this time of the year, because it is the kind of time of the year, as I'm sure you'll find as well. Angie, that it's quieter. There's not really much inspiration to get growing. Only really for the sort of hardened allotment keepers out there, and generally people that are lenders and tenders, they're not experienced growers, or for the lenders specifically, they don't really have that much interest in growing as well. So there isn't, fortunately, a lot of interest that I've had to sort of knock back over these past few months. And I really thought that Lend and Tend would be over because of the pandemic, because I'm basically trying to bring people together. And obviously I thought, oh goodness, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. But it's been nice to hear from people that are interested in doing things when the world gets a bit better.
I think that obviously the pandemic has brought it out in people as well. That there was a point where we weren't sure whether we would get vegetables in the supermarket. We didn't know what was going to happen. Things were selling out. There was this fear. There was this lack of control, I think, that we had because of the way that most of our lives are set up, that we aren't that self-sufficient. And Room to Grow kind of came from that. And I think a lot of the support that we had and the interest that we had was from those feelings, and also the more positive feelings that people get when they do grow something on their windowsill, or it's an activity to do with the kids during lockdown and that kind of thing. And the essentialness of food and food growing became headline news, So I think it's almost spurred us to start our project, in the same way that you've got continued interest over the winter. I think it's kind of awoken this feeling in people that they want to engage with their food more and that kind of thing as well.
Okay, that's great. I am mindful of the time. I'm seeing Kat saying that she has to leave. We have overrun a little bit, but there's been so much great discussion. So are there any final questions for our guests or points that anybody wants to make before we wrap up today? No? Okay. Thank you all very much. Oh, David's got his hand up. Yes. Take yourself off mute, David, please.
Sorry, I'd muted myself, trying to take myself off it. I don't want to leave people with negativity. I just want to congratulate Joyce and Andy. I think to keep up the good work. The idea of turning tarmac areas in front of houses into something that's got colour and it's productive. Because a lot of those people are illegally done it without providing drainage, so the water drains into the street, in which the council then it's a major problem with that. So, but anything that changes that, I mean, I'm fully supportive of it. I think the more ideas that we can do like that in terms of picking up random space, providing it's not somebody's right away or somebody else's property, that you're not just sort of market garden terrorism just for taking over any bits of land we can find. But no, keep it up. I don't want to leave the impression that I'm against it. I think it's a really brilliant idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I think, Angie, well done.
And what you're doing as well, Joyce.
And also, Angie's got the best camera I've ever seen, because your image is HD definition.
Yeah, Angie's photos always look good. It's true. They do always look good. Okay, thank you everybody. Thanks particularly Joyce and Angie for giving us your time this afternoon. We've got a few things to talk about now as a committee, haven't we? So we'll have a working group meeting about all this soon. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Angie.
I should say, hang on just a sec. I should say there was another item on the agenda, which was an update on our work plan. We're just going to skip that for now because we've really run out of time, and I think we'll leave that for now and just wind up. But yes, what did you want to say, Joyce?
Oh, sorry, I could pop it in an email. It was just about translating the posters, because I've only relied on Google Translate so far, so I don't want to do something that's totally wrong and then send you something that looks awful.
Don't worry. Well done for your efforts so far with the Welsh.
Right.
Translate. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Can I just tell you, Mary, I slipped downstairs because the lady from Cats Protection was coming. This little cat that's been with us for months. She's